Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. And today we're going to have a gear update on the NEMO Dragonfly 2P bike pack. Now this video will purely focus on my experience with the NEMO Dragonfly 2P bike pack along 270 miles of the Colorado Trail. If you're looking for something more in depth with the technical specifications and the features of the tent, I did do a video earlier this spring and I'll link that in the corner here. So this video is all about sort of how I did on trail, were there some things that became more annoying as I was hiking, and some of the durability of the tent that I was worried about earlier on this year. And now I've taken it out, field tested it for 270 miles. This is my thoughts, these are my opinions, comparing it really to how the Copper Spur also performed. I will talk a little bit about that as well. But anyways, here we go. So the first thing I had concerns about was the rain fly. So earlier I did have a tent that had a pinhole in it, and I ended up having to return it to NEMO, and they did determine that it was a manufacturing defect and sent me a replacement tent. So one of the things I really was looking out for was, how did that rain fly hold up? Was it going to be too fragile? Could I pack it in and out of my tent, especially with all the different plastic pieces that were a part of the tent? Unfortunately, on the first night of the trail, I somehow got these abrasion marks on the head side of the tent near the pole set. Don't really know how I got them because I had packed my tent in. I wasn't carrying it out onto my pack to let it air dry, but it was some sort of abrasion mark, and it could have been when my rain fly was out and I was packing it up, and because I was camping near some granite slogs, so it could have been the rocks brushing up against it. But that was the first night out on trail, so I ended up doing a quick field repair on it, and then when I was in town, I took some seam sealer and put some tape over it, and I didn't have any issues later on with leakage of the rain fly. The other thing with the rain fly is those small Velcro tabs that I had mentioned in my first review that I thought they were really hard to get together. Definitely still annoying out on trail, and I know if I compare it to the regular Dragonfly and the NEMO Dagger, the actual length and width of what NEMO can do with that part of the rain fly is completely possible. So yes, the small Velcro tabs to hold the rain fly to the pole set was definitely something that could still be improved on and didn't get any better as I used the tent over time. The other thing that I found out I really liked about this tent on trail was the grommet style attachment systems versus something like the Copper Spur that has the tip lock system. So when I was taking the Copper Spur out earlier on trail, there was some rain and some mud and sandy areas that I did have to camp in. Once the mud or the dirt actually got into the tip lock buckles, it was almost impossible to get it out while it was raining and actually clean it out to be able to lock those tip locks in. And so I found myself actually having to take a bobby pin to scoop out the dirt inside of those tip lock buckles to be able to get the rain fly to attach to the tent. But because these are just pure holes from the grommet style, it was a lot easier and a lot better when I was in muddy or sandy areas when dirt was getting through, because it would not get stuck in there, and I was able to get my poles and my tent and my rain fly all attached together. So that's one thing to note, is the difference between the Copper Spur and the Dragonfly is that attachment bottoms and the terrain you're on. Is that I have issues in sandy and muddy areas with mud getting stuck in those tip lock buckles and not being able to attach it. But the Dragonfly, perfect with the grommet style attachment. So that's one thing in the future I will probably be looking for in tents and reviewing in tents is it able to be cleaned when you're attaching the rain fly or the tent together, is how easy it is to do that in muddy or sandy areas. One of the issues I was also worried about was wind and high winds, especially in Colorado or when you're out of tree line and camping. And I did go through a really bad thunderstorm that when I was in a valley, and it was lightning and thundering, and you could hear the wind coming from the far end, miles away the valley, and come whoosh down into where I was camping. And I was probably halfway covered. It was in a very high beetle kill area, so there wasn't a lot of coverage overall. And I was worried about the bowing of the tent in, or that I didn't have it guide out enough. But when the wind did come through, I could feel it coming through, but I did not feel any of the bowing of the tent or see it, and my tent did not collapse in those winds, which is actually quite impressive, because normally you would have that smaller end, the green end, facing the direction the wind is coming in. This time I didn't know which direction it was coming in, so I set the tent up to the best of my ability where I thought it was, and it ended up coming to the side, and I didn't have any issues with that bowing. I did have it guide out with really big rocks though, instead of tent stakes, which I also think helped with supporting the tent as well. And to use some of those methods where you pull it out further to the side with the trekking poles or with some sticks or the taller rocks, so you can get a better lift with your Rainfly attached to the tent pole set to be able to guide out a lot better. One of the issues I did experience, and I actually didn't think it was gonna be an issue on trail, was condensation inside the tent. And this is one thing where I didn't experience it with the copper spur, but I think the difference between that is because the NEMO Dragonfly has a taller bathtub floor, you will be more prone to have condensation along the bathtub floor versus the copper spur, which has a shorter bathtub floor, and so you don't have as much in terms of the water building up on the inside of that tent because of the waterproofness of the tent. And so basically what happened is if I was in an area sleeping near a lake or in a valley where I knew there was gonna be condensation, where my head was and weirdly in my feet, I think that's because of Remy, I would have condensation on the inside of the bathtub floors and would just have to wipe it down in the morning. And I found that if I was in an area where I would be actually exposed to a little bit more wind or a breeze that was coming through, I did not experience that condensation. But I did have an issue with it, so just something to note for you guys. If you're worried about condensation or you're in an area where you will get condensation a lot, that you might want to bring a microfiber towel, or you might have issues with condensation on the bathtub floors or on the side where you're sleeping, especially up on that head area of the tent where it's really tall from a bathtub floor standpoint. And just an update on the footprint not being able to attach together, as I said in my first review, is that when I set my tent back into NEMO and I asked about it, they did pair it with a footprint they had in their lab and said everything was fine. I basically did not try to fight saying, hey, there's something wrong with it, said okay. And so basically I went the whole entire trail actually without having the footprint, just because it is a little bit heavier and it didn't integrate with the tent, so there was no point in me carrying that extra weight. Not having the footprint does not void the NEMO warranty, if you guys are wondering about that. So it is okay in terms of manufacturing defects or not to have the footprint. It'll make your tent last longer if you do have some sort of footprint, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the NEMO footprint that you get to be able to integrate with the tent. And I did not have the same delamination issues this time with my new tent that NEMO had shipped me as I did the first time around. So without a footprint, no delamination issues. I didn't have any issues with Remy tearing up the floors. The tent looked in great shape when I returned home after the Colorado Trail. And then lastly, one of the other things I found out when I was taking the tent out for the field test is that it is super easy to adjust the vestibules to tighten them and make the tent tighter as it's raining. And one of the things, because I was out on trail and went through thunderstorms and rain and hailstorms, is that during one of the storms when I did want to tighten the tent, because you know that sill nylon actually starts to sag after a while, I actually didn't have to get outside the tent to be able to tighten the adjustment points on the vestibule door. So what made that really easy is I could just stick my hand out into the vestibule and pull. So that's something for you guys to note as a tip, that you can actually adjust the vestibule doors from in the rain side of the tent if you want to tighten up the vestibules when it's raining or when that sill nylon starts to sag. So that's one cool thing I found out and was very glad I did not have to go out in the rain to be able to tighten up the Rainfly on the tent when it was raining. And now just a couple of tips or tricks or suggestions or some things I found that made the tent a little bit easier as I was backpacking along the Colorado Trail. So one thing is the landing zone, and I didn't realize before with the landing zone, is that you can put the landing zone on either side of the tent. So if you're in an area where you have to have a smaller space and you don't stake out one of the vestibule doors all the way, you can actually switch sides by just flipping the landing zone inside out. It does get dirty on both sides, but it doesn't matter which side you put the landing zone in. It's compatible with both sides of the tent. The other thing I found very helpful about the landing zone is to actually clip it in before you stake out the vestibule doors. So if you actually stake out the vestibule doors, it's really hard to get in and try to clip these little clips in to the Rainfly. But if you clip them in the tent and then you clip them in the Dragonfly before you actually stake out the doors. It's a lot easier to clip them in and just flip the Dragonfly over, clip them in, and stake out the vestibule doors. The other suggestion, which actually came from some comments in my previous review, is that you can use this to wrap up your tent stakes so you don't lose your tent stakes and you don't have to bring an extra sack for your tent stakes, though I did because mine get completely dirty. But another way not to lose this, because I lost it the first time around, is to wrap your stakes in, which I did, and it was a really good suggestion and comment from someone who had watched my previous review. I just stuck my stakes in here and then rolled it down and stuck it into my back pocket of my tent. The other sort of big tip I have, because I was taking the Dragonfly out, because it was lightweight and had all the features I needed for the Colorado Trail, is that I have some weight savings tips. So I'm gonna go through some of the weight savings tips that you guys can do to try to reduce that total pack weight that you have for this tent. So one is actually not using, especially if you're backpacking, because I took this backpacking like bikepacking, is not using the NEMO stuff sack, but using either a 4-liter or 5-liter regular stuff sack. So this is a 4-liter one from Sea to Summit. This is a 5-liter one from REI. I ended up using this for something of Remy's, and so I just stuck it in a 5-liter sack, but it does fit in a 4-liter sack as well. You can save about 2.5 ounces by switching over from the NEMO sack into a separate stuff sack to get it into your pack. The second weight savings tip I have is actually the stakes that NEMO sends you. I know most people do replace these stakes, but what's interesting is that they send you enough to stake out the tent, and they send you enough to stake out the Dragonfly or the vestibules. And for the Dragonfly, you need 9 of those to be able to stake it out, and somehow NEMO sends you 10. So I'm thinking it's just something at the manufacturer, they're counting by 2s and they send you an extra stake. You will need 12 total stakes though, in order to stake out everything from the venting point to the guy lines, to the vestibules, and the tent. And so my suggestion is to not use the stakes that NEMO sent you. Average terrain, it will work. In Colorado, these definitely will not work. And so what I did was I used 4 titanium shepherd's hook stakes to stake out the tent part, just because that's not gonna be prone to wind. It's really just to stretch out the tent. And I know that there's a love or a hate relationship with shepherd's hook tents, but that's what I took to try to reduce the weight. I did bend a couple, but they are very easy to bend back. But that's what I used just for the tent part, to be able to stretch out and stake out that tent all the way. Then for the vestibules, I used, because you need 2 on each side, I just used the classic MSR mini groundhogs. And then when I would have the venting point or any guideline points, I brought along my lovely and my loved Toke's titanium fatties. I forget, there's something else they're called now, not fatties, but I'll link it in the description below. And I love these for guideline points because they're very strong and sturdy, and they allow you to be able to stake out your tent properly with the guidelines. If there's rocks around that I can stake it out with for those guidelines, I definitely do that, but I will bring 4 for the guideline points of this tent. And so by converting to sort of those stakes, I saved a total of almost 4 ounces, 3.9-ish ounces, not using the NEMO stakes and bringing those other stakes. And then this is sort of what I mentioned before, is that I did not bring the NEMO footprint, and that footprint is about 6.7 ounces. I think it's a little bit more because I ended up cutting off the grommets, but you can save almost 7 ounces by not bringing that footprint. And just the terrain of Colorado, it's very rocky, and where I was going was very rocky, or it would be sandy. It did well on all sorts of different terrain without having issues on the floor. And so you could forego not having, on a longer trip, forego not having the footprint unless you want it for something else, to try to reduce condensation on the bottom or moisture on the bottom of the tent when you pack it up. But otherwise, if you don't bring the footprint with the tent, you save over 6.7 ounces. So total, with the weight savings with different stuff sack, a different set of tent stakes, and not bring the footprint, you save over 13 ounces in your pack. So would I bring this tent again on the trail? Yes, I would. I ended up loving this tent, especially some of the key features I talked about in my previous review. I loved having those daisy chains to hang up my clothes out on trail, especially at night. So if you think about where condensation is gonna happen on your tent, and you would have the copper spur and you hang your clothes on the outside of the tent, you're gonna get moisture on that outside of the tent. So having these daisy chains on the inside of the tent here was very key to keeping my clothes dry and up and out of the tent, and not in my way hanging in the tent, and be able to have dry clothes in the morning and hang everything up. The other thing I still loved was where the storage was in this tent right above you and high off the floors on either side of the tent. And this was great, especially with the dog, because Remy sleeps at the foot of my tent and gets up and turns around at night. And in the copper spur, he definitely would get up and hit that storage area on the foot end of the tent. And I basically couldn't put anything there anyway. So I just loved the storage in here, and it definitely was enough and in the right locations to make it very easy to grab without having to reach down or move around inside of the tent. And then lastly, the thing I loved taking this out on a longer trail was the space inside the vestibules. So there is sometimes the issue with not having a big enough campsite to be able to stake out the vestibules all the way, but I only had to do that one night, and I was able to basically roll and stake down. So I only had one vestibule open. When it's raining or when you're trying to dry out a bunch of stuff in those vestibules, having that extra space was key in hiking this longer trail. And lastly, just in dealing with NEMO's customer service team, I thought they had a great response time, less than 24 hours in almost all cases, to respond to my questions. They answered it very thoroughly. And in the end, like, they didn't try to blame me or say I wasn't doing anything right with the tent before they found a resolution. They just took the tent in, inspected it, and said, hey, we'll send you a new tent, and they sent me a new tent. I really appreciated that they took the time to respond to my requests and my questions and actually stood by their guarantees. So that's one thing I really appreciate about NEMO. And again, definitely would purchase more from them in the future just based on their customer service and their warranties and the customer service response time. Anyways, that's it. Hopefully you enjoyed the contents of this video, found it a little bit helpful, and if you have any other questions, feel free to put them in the comments below. Again, I've taken this out on the Colorado Trail with me, so over 270 miles of use with this, as well as the copper spur. So if you still have questions about either of these tents, feel free to ask. I'll definitely answer them. Anyways, if you want to give this video a big thumbs up, I would greatly appreciate it. And if you have not yet subscribed to my channel, please consider doing so. I talk all about hiking, camping, and backpacking, and your general life adventures with you and your dog. Thanks for watching.